Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Watercolor 101. I haven't done one of these in a while, and I decided to do this mostly because I've received a lot of questions over time, both in my Craftsy classes and through email and on YouTube. Questions from people asking about the difference between using a split primary palette that I talk about in my Craftsy classes and the paints that I use almost all of the time, actually all of the time, for the Artists for Everyone projects, and also for a lot of my own work now. So those are the handcrafted watercolors made by Wildthorne, who makes the Artists for Everyone palette. And she's my dear friend Kim, and she makes exquisite handmade paints. So I just wanted to demonstrate the difference and explain to you that they are not really comparable. Okay, so I'm going to show you why I have both and why I use both and when I would use one over the other. Okay, so most of you know that I'm in the middle of some big projects right now for my professional work. And so for my personal work, I have not been able to spend much time at all for my personal work. So I've been doing, since the beginning of the year, some daily practices, more intuitive paintings in my daily sketchbook, some my dandelion lessons that bring me so much joy, all of these things. And then I've also been doing some spontaneous paintings anytime I have a chance, you know. So I was looking for something that was just very special, that would invite me to show up every day, that would be just different than what I'm used to. And what I'm used to is a split primary limited palette. This is what I use for my professional work, okay? I will add in a couple other colors every now and again, but mostly I use this palette because it is an intuitive mixing palette. It can mix any possible color that I need to match, okay? So in my professional work, I often need to match colors exactly. And I know that I can do that with this palette. However, for my more intuitive work and things that are more spontaneous and from my heart and much more intensely personal, I have been using the Wildthorne paints. And when I discovered them, this was not the first handmade watercolor that I've ever used, okay? I've used many, many different kinds, and I've also used many different brands of mineral paints and earth pigments. These were different though, and number one, they perform beautifully. They really do. They perform beautifully. They wet very easily. They're very richly pigmented, finely mulled. They're beautifully made. But there's also something beyond that about them, and that is that the colors I just stuck my finger in New Gamboge. The colors that Kim chooses, the pigments that she chooses to work with, are very special, and I have never really encountered anything like them anywhere else. Some of the colors are so unique, and the way they behave together, and they just touch something in me that my regular tube watercolors have never done, or any other handmade paint. And I don't really know the answer to that. I just know that I love them, I treasure them, they're very special to me. And this is my entire collection that I've collected over time. Okay, so many, many colors that I don't use every day. But I've narrowed down my selections to these 10 colors. These are the colors that I use almost every day. Okay, these work really well together. This is actually the Artists for Everyone palette. So I'm going to be using these when I do my demonstration today. So to talk about the split primary palette again, these are mostly Daniel Smith paints. There's one Winsor & Newton and one Holbein. Just because I have a lot of my paints at the studio right now, I teach with these, and I didn't have the exact tubes that were on my Craftsy class, but they're basically the same pigments. So A split primary palette consists of 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues that are both warm and cool. This extra color here is burnt sienna because I just wanted to demonstrate something to you. So for my cool yellow, I use a Hansa Yellow Light, which is PY3, and all I have here is an Indian yellow for my warm yellow, but usually I use New Gamboge by Daniel Smith. Anything that's on the warm side that leans toward orange and that's transparent and hopefully single pigment would be fine. So those are my yellows, and they are here in my palette. And then for my reds, my warm red is called Transparent Pyrrole Orange, and it is P071, I believe. Just make sure. Pyrrole Orange, P071, that's correct. It is a gorgeous color, transparent Pyrrole Orange, very different from just regular Pyrrole Orange, which is P073. Very different color, so pigment numbers do matter. And then the other one is Quinacridone Rose, which is my cool red, beautiful, transparent, glowing cool red, PV19, okay? And then for my blues, it's very basic. French Ultramarine, PB29, and Phthalo Blue Green Shade, PB15.3. Warm blue is the ultramarine, cool blue is the phthalo blue. Okay, so those are what are in my palette here. The other color I have is Burnt Sienna by Winsor & Newton, and I just wanted to show you the difference between a burnt sienna and a mass manufactured watercolor, and then the burnt sienna that Kim makes. Okay, I'm going to show you the difference between them. So this is PR 101. It is actually not a traditional burnt sienna pigment. That would be PB07. So I'm not sure, but this is a gorgeous burnt sienna. I've used it for many years and I really like it. But I'm going to show you the difference between the two. So first I want to show you something about transparency. And as usual, I forgot my glass of water. So I'm going to turn this off and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I have my water, and I also tested my black line. This is a permanent Pentel marker, and as you can see, it wasn't quite dry yet, so I just gave it a few more minutes. Hopefully it's good now. These pens are very wet, so they take a long time to dry. And I'm also using just a little square wash, a 1/2-inch wash brush, just to mix colors and paint these swatches. So I'm going to start with my split primaries, and I'm going to swatch them across this black line. And what we're going to do is we're going to dry them, and we're going to see if the paint disappears over the black line or if it leaves some kind of film. And that gives us a clue to its transparency. And for a split primary mixing palette, it is super, super important that your pigments are transparent, because you're going to be doing a lot of mixing of colors. We never, ever, ever, hardly ever use these colors on their own, okay, which is one big difference between this and like the Wildthorne paints, which I would use on their own in a heartbeat. So these are very bright, and they're not really suitable to paint natural subjects unless you mix them. So we're going to see if they're transparent. Okay, if we don't use transparent colors in a mixing palette, what can happen is that we end up getting mud very, very quickly. Opaque colors will make mud. All right, so there is my cool yellow. Now for my warm yellow. Just painting them across so you can see how incredibly vibrant and transparent these pigments are. Okay. Next, my warm red. Okay, there's my warm red. Now my cool red. Again, really, really vibrant colors. These are not colors that I would use on their own. These do not, I am not a vibrant color person, so I would never use these on their own. Hardly, really, ever. Some people love vibrant colors, and so these, that's a whole different aesthetic, and you have to go with what you love. But for me, these are too vibrant to use on their own. So there is my warm blue, beautiful blue. And the whole idea here, and this is my cool blue. So the whole idea here is that we cannot mix colors to become more vibrant. Every time we mix a color, it's going to become duller and more muted. So just remember that. So we have to start with the most vibrant, cleanest, clearest representation of that color that we can, and that's what these are. Okay, so that's the beauty of this. It is the perfect palette to learn how to color mix, to learn about color theory, and it's the perfect palette to use when we need to mix very specific colors, when we're trying to color match. So let's say in botanical art, that is very, very important, and these are a great starting point for that, okay? All right. I'm also going to swatch out the burnt sienna. And it's a beautiful burnt sienna. This is the Winsor & Newton burnt sienna PR 101. I love it. Okay, it's very clear and orange. It's beautiful. All right, so that's my split primary palette. Traditional watercolors. Now I'm going to swatch out my Wildthorne colors that are comparable in some ways. Okay, so I do, Kim does make a beautiful, clear, glowing yellow, and it's definitely a lemon yellow, and it's called Mimosa, and it's actually very transparent. It is, in my opinion, so much more beautiful than any yellow I've ever used. So Mimosa would actually be fine to use in a split primary mixing palette, okay? But for the warm yellow, I chose the Ochre Leger for the warmer side of the spectrum. It's very soft and very muted, okay? It's very natural, so it blends right in when I want to do a landscape or something like that. It is warmer, but it tends to be a little duller and more brown than, let's say, a new gamboge. It's also quite transparent. Normally, yellow ochres are really opaque, so this is a lovely, lovely yellow ochre, and it fits my aesthetic just perfectly. So for a warmer red, I chose the Cienne Brûlée because it's so beautiful. Look how rich that is. Okay, but it is definitely not a clear, vibrant color. It is earthier and more real and more the color that I would find looking out of my woods right now and seeing the beech leaf litter on the forest floor. It's almost exactly this color. So it's a very natural and muted color, very, very different than a warm red in a mixing palette. Okay, I don't have a cooler red because I typically don't find it so much in what I personally paint, but I chose the Wood Rose, and the Wood Rose is a very clear, glowing, peachy pink, okay, much more natural than something like a quinacridone rose, but certainly not going to mix with blue and give you a brilliant violet like quinacridone rose would, okay? Not the purpose of these paints, all right? I have a beautiful violet. It's called Wood Violet. It's a beautiful, clear, glowing violet. I have that in my Wildthorne paints if I need it. Okay, so then the next one is the Cobalt Blue Primaire. And Cobalt Blue Primaire is a very neutral blue, so it can be cool or warm. And that's why I only need one. If I want to warm it up a little bit, I could add just a touch of Wood Rose or Cienne Brûlée to it. If I want to cool it out a little bit, I can add a touch of Viridian, which is also in my palette. So Cobalt Blue Primaire is kind of in between these two blues. Okay, it's not one or the other. All right, but it's an incredibly beautiful color, and it's very, very useful. Also, it can be very transparent. Okay. If you could see this in person as they dry, these have almost all disappeared. This one leaves a little, very slight film. The yellow ochre, definitely a semi-transparent pigment. The Cienne Brûlée is definitely on the semi-transparent to semi-opaque side. Wood Rose is fairly clear, and the Cobalt is fairly clear. Okay, and now I want to show you a couple other colors. So this is Viridian Green. Very, very opaque color, but when we add more water to it, it can become more transparent. Okay, this is a really, really useful color for many, many applications. However, it is not a good color for tons of color mixing, okay, because if you start mixing it with like burnt sienna, Cienne Brûlée, it's going to get muddy very quickly. That's not the purpose of these paints. We can mix them, and I do mix them, and I mix them in the Artist for Everyone videos, but it's very subtle, and I'm using a lot of water, and I'm never mixing more than 2 colors at a time because you don't need to. These paints are already natural looking enough. The raw umber is a gorgeous raw umber, okay? So we can make raw umber with these colors, all right? But it won't have this special granulation and color variation that a real natural raw umber would have. So now I want to show you over here a little bit the difference between a handcrafted watercolor in burnt sienna. You see how rich that is? And if I start to put water in it and mass it out, you see the granulation properties happening? And it can get even darker than this, okay? It can get really, really, really deep, all right? So exquisite. Now, if I use the Winsor Newton burnt sienna, it's also beautiful, okay? It's very bright. It has a brightness to it, all right? It's kind of bright, a little bit on the orange side. Beautiful, all right? Add some water to it. It does have some granulation properties, but it is lacking the earthiness and richness that this paint has. All right, they look very, very different when they dry. This has a whole sort of universe of color within it, all these different variances in color. This is beautiful, beautiful natural pigment. It's the true mineral pigment. This is not. Okay, so you can buy burnt sienna PBR 07 in in different paint manufacturers, but I'm just telling you, I've used them all, and I have never used one that does this beautifully, okay? So that is the main difference. So again, split primary mixing palette, incredibly useful, okay, for when we need those clear, clean, vibrant colors to mix any color we could possibly ever want to match. And all you really need are these 6 colors. So it's an investment worth making. Okay, you can buy tubes of these. These tubes will last me several years. Okay, keep them in a little palette like this, mix them on a plate. You can just refill as you need to. So these paints serve a purpose for learning color theory, for painting things that we want to be very, very specific with our color matching. The Wildthorne paints are something very special. And they immediately have a more natural appearance. They are something we can dip into and use in our paintings without having to mix at all, barely. So I can show you, I would not want to use these 6 colors to make paintings like this, correct? It would never work. I mean, I would have to sit there and mix and mix and mix and mix until I would get the right color. For these paintings, I use my Wildthorne paints and I just dip in and paint. It's very intuitive. I don't have to mix the colors. They're already beautiful, all right? And then I can be very, very spontaneous with landscapes. I don't have to mix my colors. I can dip right in and paint. These are not mixed. These are straight from the pan, put on the paper, layered, and then the paints mix and mingle. Okay, they're very natural looking. All right? Straight from the, it's just a very different experience to use something that's handcrafted like this, okay? That gives me all sorts of beautiful variations that just mix right on the paper. I don't have to mix color. Whereas if you look at these colors, it would take a lot of work to make this. I could do it. It still wouldn't have the subtle variations and the beautiful textures that these handcrafted paints have. But these can make also very beautiful landscapes as well. It's just a different approach, all right? And I can't compare them. I recommend both. All right, I hope this was helpful. I'm gonna make another video today for Artists for Everyone, and we're going to paint a crocus. All right, I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks so much. Any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be sure to answer. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.